Ancient Rome gleams in our imagination with marble monuments and triumphant legions, but beneath that polished surface festered secrets so dark they could rewrite history itself. What if the glorious empire you learned about was only a carefully crafted illusion? In this journey, you will uncover 25 of Rome's most shocking and sinister truths, from the private madness of its emperors to the horrifying spectacles used to control the masses. By the end, you will see this ancient civilization in a completely new and unsettling light. We will explore why a teenage ruler worshipped a strange sun god and how an entire legion of 5,000 soldiers simply vanished from the earth. These are not just stories, they are the buried realities of a world built on power, fear, and mystery. What part of this hidden history are you most curious to see revealed? The polished marble of the Forum hid a network of spies more insidious than any barbarian army. Long before modern secret police forces, the emperors of Rome perfected state surveillance with a group known as the Frumentarii. They began humbly enough as military officers tasked with securing grain supplies for the legions, but this mundane duty gave them the perfect cover. They traveled everywhere, asked questions as a matter of routine, and had access to every corner of the empire. It was a power the emperors could not resist weaponizing. These grain agents transformed into a feared secret police, answering only to the ruler himself. Their mission was simple and terrifying: to know everything. A careless joke in a tavern, a private complaint about taxes, a whispered criticism of the emperor, the Frumentarii were listening. They built dossiers on citizens, suppressed any hint of dissent, and quietly removed political rivals, often through sudden disappearances or so-called accidents. Their authority to confiscate property on the slightest suspicion made them doubly feared, turning persecution into a profitable enterprise for the state. This created an atmosphere of deep paranoia where no one could be trusted, not even one's own family. The very people you relied on for your daily bread could be the ones sealing your fate. While the Frumentarii policed the thoughts of the common people, a very different kind of madness was unfolding at the very top. The imperial palace itself became the stage for one of history's most bizarre and unsettling rules. Emperor Elagabalus was only 14 years old when absolute power was thrust upon him, and he used it to systematically dismantle the traditions of Rome. His reign was a whirlwind of religious fanaticism and personal decadence that shocked even the most jaded senators. He arrived from Syria with a deep devotion not to Jupiter or Mars, but to a mysterious sun god, Elagabalus, represented by a strange black conical stone. He forced Rome's elite to watch as he danced around altars in lavish, gem-encrusted robes, declaring his foreign deity the supreme god of the empire. This was more than a personal quirk. It was a direct assault on the very foundation of Roman state religion. The public spectacles were only the beginning. Behind the palace walls, his behavior grew even more extreme. Ancient historians report that he would secretly visit the city's brothels and then set up a booth within the palace itself, offering his services as a prostitute to courtiers and servants. His dinner parties were legendary for their dangerous excess. Guests would arrive expecting a feast, only to find themselves buried under a sudden avalanche of fragrant rose petals, so deep that some reportedly suffocated before help could arrive. Elagabalus further defied Roman convention through his expression of gender. He openly expressed a desire to be referred to as a lady, not a lord, and sought physicians who could, in his time, change his physical body to female. For the Roman elite, this was not a matter of personal liberty. It was a profound and terrifying crisis. The emperor, who was supposed to be the embodiment of Roman virtue and stability, was actively rejecting every norm. His behavior created such political and social chaos that after just 4 years, the Praetorian Guard had enough. They assassinated the teenage emperor, dismembered his body, and dragged it through the streets before throwing it into the Tiber River. The Senate then enacted a Damnatio Memoriae, a decree of official oblivion, ordering his name to be erased from all public monuments and records. They tried to scrub him from history itself. But what kind of system creates such a ruler, and what does his extreme rejection of Roman values say about the empire's core stability? While the emperor danced in his palace of rose petals, the true heartbeat of Rome was not in its marble forums but in a cramped, reeking valley called the Subura. This was the city's vast, teeming slum, a world away from the spacious villas on the Palatine Hill. For the million common people who called Rome home, life was a constant struggle within these overcrowded streets. Their homes were not elegant domus houses but insulae, towering wooden apartment blocks that soared 6 or 7 stories high. These buildings were death traps in waiting, thrown together with cheap materials and constant disregard for safety. They collapsed with terrifying regularity, and because they were built so closely together, a cooking fire in one could become an inferno that consumed an entire city block in hours. Stepping into an insula meant breathing in air thick with smoke from countless hearths and the ever-present odor of human waste. There were no bathrooms, no running water. The contents of chamber pots were often simply tossed out of a window into the street below, with only a hurried shout of "Look out" as a warning to those passing by. The streets themselves were narrow canyons of filth, flowing with garbage and worse, creating a stench so powerful you could almost taste it. In this labyrinth of desperation, crime was not just common, it was a way of life. Gangs ruled the alleyways after dark, and walking alone was an invitation to be robbed or worse. This was the reality for the overwhelming majority of Romans, a life of squalor, danger, and noise, all happening in the shadow of the city's majestic temples and monuments. The glorious Rome we envision was, for most, a brutal, stinking, and precarious existence. How could an empire that built such architectural marvels tolerate such inhuman conditions for its own people, just a few streets away from the homes of the elite? The squalor of the slums was matched only by a chilling silence that fell within the walls of even the wealthiest Roman homes. In a society that celebrated family, the very definition of who was allowed to be part of that family was shockingly narrow. The absolute authority of the Roman father, the paterfamilias, was a legal and social power so vast it included the right to decide if a newborn would live or die. The moment a child was born, it was placed on the ground before him. If he picked the baby up, it was accepted into the family. If he did not, the infant was taken away. This practice was known as exposure. The unwanted newborn, often a girl or a child with a perceived disability, would be left outdoors in a remote spot or on a trash heap. There, the baby would succumb to the elements, be taken by wild animals, or sometimes be picked up by slave traders who raised them for a life of servitude. This was not a rare, hidden crime. It was a common, legally accepted, and grimly practical reality. For many families, especially the poor, another daughter meant a costly dowry they could not afford. A child with physical differences was seen as a burden or a bad omen from the gods. Even the rich practiced exposure to control the size of their estates and preserve their wealth for a single heir. Philosophers and writers of the time discussed it with a cold detachment, treating it as a simple matter of household economics. This widespread infanticide presents a profound moral contradiction. Rome built a civilization of unparalleled laws and engineering, yet its most vulnerable citizens could be discarded with a father's silent nod. How does a society so advanced in so many ways justify such a fundamental breach of human compassion? And what does this dark undercurrent of family life tell us about the true cost of Roman order and patriarchy? Even within the sacred boundaries of the family, a darker spiritual hunger was taking root in the shadows of the empire. Far from the public temples of Jupiter and Mars, a different kind of worship flourished in hidden caves and underground chambers. This was the cult of Mithras, a secretive, all-male religion that captivated the toughest men in Rome, its legions. For a soldier far from home, the promise of brotherhood and divine favor was powerful, but the price of entry was a journey through terror. The path to enlightenment was a brutal climb through 7 distinct levels of initiation, each with its own harrowing ordeal. An initiate might be blindfolded, his hands bound with chicken entrails, and forced to endure simulated threats and physical challenges meant to test his courage and loyalty to the absolute limit. These were not simple ceremonies, they were trials by fire and ice, designed to break a man down and rebuild him as a devoted member of an exclusive fraternity. The ultimate test, the heart of the Mithraic mystery, was a ritual known as the Tauroctony. In a dimly lit subterranean temple, a great bull would be sacrificed upon a central platform. The act was rich with cosmic symbolism, representing the god Mithras slaying the primordial bull to release the forces of life and creation. But for those present, the experience was visceral and shocking. Ancient sources whisper of initiates being led into a pit covered by a wooden grate. As the bull was slain above them, they would be drenched in the animal's hot, cascading blood, a baptism meant to wash away their old life and grant them rebirth and strength. The secrecy surrounding these rites was absolute. Members took a sacred oath never to reveal what transpired in the Mithraeum, the cult's underground sanctuary. To outsiders, this combination of soldierly membership, bloody rituals, and absolute silence was both appealing and deeply frightening. It offered a potent sense of belonging and spiritual power that the official state religion often lacked, yet its hidden nature fueled rumors of depravity and conspiracy. Why would Rome's most disciplined men submit to such terrifying ordeals? And what did their devotion to this secret god reveal about the spiritual void at the heart of the empire's own power? Even the sacred bloodlines of the emperors were not immune to a poison flowing through the very veins of the city. A silent, insidious threat was likely present at every imperial banquet, in every sip of wine, and even in the water flowing into the palace kitchens. That threat was lead. The Romans loved their lead, using it for everything from the massive aqueduct pipes that brought water for miles to the cooking pots that simmered their favorite sauces. The most dangerous use of all, however, was in their wine. To prevent fermentation and sweeten their favorite vintage, Roman vintners would boil down grape juice in lead-lined pots, creating a concentrated syrup called sapa. This syrup was notoriously toxic, leaching massive amounts of lead into every drop. The ruling class, including the emperors, consumed this tainted wine in staggering quantities, unknowingly dosing themselves with a powerful neurotox, and day after day, year after year. The symptoms of chronic lead poisoning read like a checklist for the worst Roman emperors. It causes severe abdominal pain, gout, and cognitive decline. But most tellingly, it triggers intense paranoia, irrational anger, and violent, unpredictable mood swings. Look at the historical records of Caligula. He famously declared war on the sea god Neptune, ordering his soldiers to stab the ocean with their spears and gather seashells as spoils of war. He threatened to make his favorite horse a consul, a chief magistrate of Rome. These are not just the acts of a cruel man, they are the potential signs of a mind unraveling from heavy metal poisoning. Consider Nero, who may have fiddled while Rome burned. His reign descended into a frenzy of executions, including that of his own mother. He exhibited extreme vanity and a detachment from reality that aligns perfectly with the neurological damage caused by lead. This theory offers a haunting possibility. The madness that sometimes seized the throne was not purely a flaw of character or the corrupting nature of power. It may have been, at least in part, a physical sickness, a literal poisoning of the imperial mind. The very engineering that made Rome great, its plumbing, and the culinary luxuries that defined its elite culture, may have slowly dripped insanity into the brains of its rulers. Could a simple element have scrambled the judgment of the most powerful men in the world, steering the empire itself toward chaos? Beneath the feet of every Roman citizen flowed a river of filth, a monument to waste that was as grand as any temple. The Cloaca Maxima, the city's great sewer, was an engineering marvel on the surface, a testament to Roman ingenuity that drained the marshes and channeled the city's refuse into the Tiber. But to call it merely a sewer is to misunderstand its true nature. It was a subterranean world of absolute darkness, a labyrinth of brick and stone echoing with the drip of water and the skittering of claws. The air within was a thick, poisonous miasma, a cocktail of human waste and decaying matter that could choke a man unconscious in minutes. This was not just a place for waste, it was a place of terror. Giant rats, nourished by the endless supply of garbage, grew to the size of small dogs, their nests hidden in the perpetual gloom. For the condemned, a sentence to the Cloaca Maxima was a death more horrifying than any public execution. Being thrown into that churning, black current meant being swept away into a lightless hell, to be crushed against the ancient walls, drowned in the unspeakable flow, or torn apart by the creatures that ruled that domain. It was a silent, anonymous end, a body disappearing into the city's own bowels. The only souls who dared enter this underworld voluntarily were the Cloacarii, the sewer workers. These men were the most despised and dangerous laborers in Rome. Lowered on ropes into the suffocating darkness, they wielded hooks and nets to clear blockages, their bodies coated in filth, their lungs burning with the foul air. A single misstep meant a plunge into the torrent, and a broken rope meant being left to die in the absolute dark. The Cloaca Maxima was the empire's dirty secret in the most literal sense, a necessary artery of filth that sustained the gleaming city above. It was a chilling symbol of the Roman world, a civilization that could build breathtaking aqueducts to bring fresh water in, yet relied on a nightmarish tunnel to carry its own corruption away. What does it say about a society when its greatest public health achievement is also one of its most terrifying places? But even the most elaborate curse could not protect a Roman from the most terrifying fate of all, a death without a proper burial. For the poorest and most destitute in the city, the end of life was not a dignified passage to the afterlife, but a final, chilling indignity. Their bodies were not cremated or laid to rest in family tombs. Instead, they were unceremoniously dumped into massive, open-air pits on the city's outskirts known as puticuli. These were not quiet, hallowed cemeteries, but gaping chasms in the earth where corpses were piled atop one another, layer upon layer, and left to rot under the open sky. The stench that wafted from these pits was a permanent stain on the air, a foul miasma that could be smelled from miles away. The scenes were horrific, with the bodies of the unknown poor, criminals, and even executed slaves left exposed to scavenging dogs and carrion birds. The puticuli were a stark, brutal reminder of the social contract's absolute limit in Rome. Your status in life determined your treatment in death. If you had no family, no money, and no patron, you were simply waste to be disposed of, your memory erased as your body decomposed in a communal grave. This practice was not just about poverty, it was a powerful tool of social control. The threat of ending up in a puticuli, unmourned and forgotten, hung over the lower classes, a grim incentive to remain obedient and find favor with those above them. How could a civilization so obsessed with legacy and eternal fame tolerate such anonymous, mass graves for so many of its own people? The glorious city of marble and triumph was literally built upon a foundation of forgotten dead. The grim anonymity of the puticuli was a fate some may have dreaded, but for countless others, a far more intimate and unending horror began the moment they were put on display at a slave market. Slavery was the brutal engine of the Roman economy, but its most deeply personal violation was the sexual exploitation woven into the very fabric of daily life. A slave was not a person under Roman law. They were property, a living tool with no legal rights whatsoever, especially not over their own body. This legal fiction gave masters absolute power, a power that extended routinely to sexual use. The concept of rape as we understand it did not apply because you could not legally violate something you owned. This institutionalized abuse was an open secret, a grimly accepted part of the social order. Slave markets catered specifically to this demand. Traders would carefully evaluate and price young, attractive men and women higher for this explicit purpose. These individuals were stripped and examined not just for strength, but for their physical appeal, their humiliation, a public spectacle before their private torment even began. Within the home, the practice was ubiquitous. A master could, and often did, summon any enslaved person to his bedroom at will. For the enslaved, refusal was not an option. Resistance was met with brutal punishment or death. Some masters kept favorite slaves, known as concubines or catamites, for their exclusive use, creating a twisted dynamic where a victim's survival might depend on pleasing their abuser. The children born from these encounters were not recognized as heirs. They were simply more slaves adding to the master's property. This system created a world of profound psychological trauma, where a person was forced to endure repeated violation by the very individual who controlled every aspect of their existence, from the food they ate to the air they breathed. How does a society function when such profound cruelty is not an aberration, but a mundane, legally protected household custom? This was not the shadowy fringe of Roman life. It was happening in the villas next door, a chilling testament to how absolute power corrupts absolutely, poisoning the most private spaces of the ancient world. While the city above disposed of its dead in open pits, a far more intricate world of the deceased existed in the darkness below. Deep beneath the bustling streets, a sprawling labyrinth of tunnels known as the catacombs winds for hundreds of miles, a silent city of the dead echoing the one above. These are not merely Christian burial sites as often believed, but underground cemeteries used by Jews, followers of Mithras, and various other cults who all sought a sacred, secure place for their departed. To descend into the catacombs was to leave the world of light and sound behind. The air is cold and heavy, thick with the dust of centuries. Your only light is the flickering flame of a lamp, casting dancing shadows on walls lined from floor to ceiling with shelf-like niches, each one holding a body sealed in plaster or a stone slab. For miles in every direction, this silent honeycomb of death stretches into an impenetrable blackness, a place where it is terrifyingly easy to become lost forever. But these tunnels were more than just a repository for bones. Their very secrecy made them perfect for the living. In hidden chambers carved off the main passages, small groups could gather away from the prying eyes of the state. Here, followers of forbidden religions might chant their prayers to a foreign god, or political dissidents could plot in whispers, their voices swallowed by the earth. For those hiding from persecution, the catacombs offered a desperate refuge, a cold, dark sanctuary where the only company was the endless presence of the dead. Modern archaeologists continue to make chilling discoveries in these depths. They find strange symbols scratched into the walls that do not match any known faith, and evidence of unusual burial practices, like skeletons arranged in strange, star-like patterns or buried with artifacts from conflicting beliefs. These finds are haunting clues, hinting at spiritual ideas and communities that were so thoroughly erased by history that their only remaining trace is here in the silent dark. What forgotten prayers were spoken in these echoing chambers, and what entire belief systems have vanished, leaving only their mysterious dead as a testament? Even the promise of cleanliness and relaxation was a carefully constructed illusion. The grand Roman baths were not just for washing, they were sprawling social hubs where the lines between leisure and depravity blurred completely. Beneath the soaring arches and beautiful mosaics, a world of illicit trade flourished. Prostitution was rampant, operating so openly that certain architectural niches, known as fornications, were specifically designed for these fleeting, anonymous encounters. In the steamy, dimly lit corners away from the main swimming pools, patrons could engage in transactions that were an open secret to everyone. But sex was not the only commodity traded in the humid air. The baths were a paradise for petty criminals. While a wealthy citizen relaxed with a massage or chatted with friends, a skilled pickpocket could easily slip a hand into the pile of discarded clothing, making off with a purse or a valuable ring. The constant flow of people and the casual, unguarded atmosphere made it the perfect hunting ground. More dangerously, the baths were also a prime location for political espionage. Informants for the frumentarii mingled with the crowds, their ears tuned to the careless whispers of businessmen and senators who felt safe letting their guard down in a place of leisure. A complaint about the emperor's new tax, a cynical joke about a recent military defeat, or a private confidence shared between friends, all of it was collected in the steam and reported back to the authorities. The warm, moist environment that was so soothing to the muscles was also a perfect breeding ground for disease. The water in the large communal pools was rarely changed, becoming a soupy broth of sweat, skin oils, and other bodily filth from hundreds of bathers each day. There was no chlorine, no modern understanding of germs. Skin infections, parasites, and more serious illnesses spread freely in this shared bath, making a visit to the baths a genuine health risk. So the next time you imagine a Roman enjoying a day at the baths, see beyond the marble and mosaic. See the thief eyeing a loose tunic, the informant listening by the hot plunge, and the hidden niches where the empire's moral decay was on full display. This was not a sanctuary from the city's chaos, it was a microcosm of it. The steaming plate of mushrooms seemed a simple, rustic meal, a favorite of the aging Emperor Claudius. But that final dinner was a carefully laid trap, the culmination of a plot hatched by the one person who should have been his greatest protector, his wife Agrippina. History records that she poisoned him to clear the path for her own son, Nero, to seize the throne. This was not a crime of passion, but a cold, calculated act of political assassination from within the innermost circle of the imperial family. Agrippina was a woman of formidable and ruthless ambition, a descendant of Augustus himself who understood that bloodlines were the ultimate currency of power. She had maneuvered her way into marriage with her uncle Claudius, and then systematically worked to sideline his own son, Britannicus, pushing her Nero to the forefront. With Claudius beginning to show favor once more to his natural heir, Agrippina decided the old emperor had outlived his usefulness. The method of murder was as cunning as it was cruel. The poison was likely not a single substance, but a complex concoction designed to mimic illness. Ancient sources suggest the primary agent might have been arsenic or hemlock, both known to Roman assassins. But some historians speculate a more insidious recipe was used, one that incorporated a deadly amanita mushroom, its toxins masked by the flavor of other edible fungi on the plate. The question that haunts this historical crime is not just who, but how. Did Claudius die quickly, collapsing at the table in front of his horrified guests? Or was it a slower, more agonizing end, with the poison working over hours, causing crippling stomach cramps, violent vomiting, and a gradual shutdown of his body as he lay in his bed, perhaps even aware that his own wife had delivered this death? His official cause of death was recorded as natural, a convenient fiction for the public, but in the hushed corridors of the palace everyone knew the truth. The imperial household was a viper's nest where a family meal could be your last, and the greatest threat to an emperor's life was not a foreign enemy, but the smiling face across the dinner table. Poison was the silent, unseen killer in every Roman dining room. The art of beneficium was not a dark fantasy, it was a sophisticated and terrifyingly common political tool. In a world where power changed hands at the point of a dagger or the tip of a cup, poison offered a subtle, deniable method of removal. It was the perfect weapon for the elite, allowing an enemy to be eliminated without a messy public scene, their death often written off as a sudden, tragic illness. This created a climate of deep-seated paranoia that poisoned social life itself, especially the banquet, which was supposed to be a celebration of friendship and trust. No one of status would dare eat or drink without first employing a pregustator, a food taster whose job was to sample every dish and sip every wine before it touched their master's lips. These tasters were living shields, human sacrifices to the cause of their employer's survival, their very presence a constant, grim reminder that any meal could be their last. The most infamous practitioner of this dark craft was a woman named Locusta, a professional poisoner so skilled she was kept on a state-funded retainer by the imperial family. She was the go-to expert for emperors who needed a discreet elimination. It was Locusta whom Agrippina likely employed to murder Claudius, and it was Locusta whom her son Nero later used to kill his younger stepbrother Britannicus, removing a rival for the throne. Under Nero's command, she even ran a kind of macabre academy, teaching the art of poisoning to others in the imperial household. The poisons themselves were a dark science brewed from a horrifying pharmacy of natural sources. Deadly nightshade could cause delirium and paralysis, while hemlock induced a gradual, creeping paralysis that started at the feet and moved upward until it stilled the heart. Toxic compounds were extracted from poisonous frogs and snakes, and minerals like arsenic were ground into fine, undetectable powders. The true masters of beneficium could even calibrate their doses, administering a slow, cumulative poison over weeks to mimic a wasting disease or a single, violent toxin that acted in minutes. This constant shadow of suspicion meant that every invitation to dinner was a potential threat, every toast a possible farewell, and every host a suspected assassin. In the highest circles of Roman power, the greatest luxury was not fine food or aged wine, but the simple, profound peace of mind that came from a safe meal. The fear of poison at a private dinner was nothing compared to the terrifying spectacle of violence the state orchestrated for the entire public. We often think of the gladiatorial games as crude entertainment, but their true purpose was far more calculated and sinister. This was social control on a massive scale, a policy so effective we still use the phrase for it today, bread and circuses. The poet Juvenal coined that term, panem et circenses, to describe how the Roman populace had abandoned its political duties, caring only for the free-grain dole and the thrilling distractions of the arena. The emperors understood that a hungry, idle, and discontented mob of hundreds of thousands was a threat to their power. So they provided a solution, free food to fill their stomachs and breathtaking, brutal spectacles to occupy their minds. The games were a masterful tool of pacification. By giving the people what they craved, the state bought their complacency and diverted their attention from corruption, inequality, and the slow erosion of their political rights. Why protest against an unfair tax or a corrupt official when the most exciting event of the year is about to begin at the Colosseum? The violence itself was the message. When a gladiator fell, defeated and at the mercy of the crowd, it was the emperor who gave the final thumbs up or thumbs down. This was not just a decision about one man's life, it was a constant, visceral demonstration of who held the ultimate power over life and death. The execution of criminals in the arena, often dressed as mythical figures and torn apart by wild beasts, served a similar grim purpose. It was a public service announcement written in blood, a graphic reminder of the horrific fate awaiting anyone who dared challenge the established order. The roar of the crowd, the smell of sweat and sand and blood, the sight of a man fighting for his life, all of it was engineered to create a collective frenzy, a shared catharsis that left the people emotionally drained and politically passive. The games were not a celebration of life, but a chilling theater of death, designed to make the masses forget their own power and worship the hand that fed them the spectacle. The very blood spilled for entertainment was believed to hold a miraculous cure. In a shocking final act to the arena's spectacle, the crowd would not just disperse. As the body of a freshly slain gladiator lay cooling on the sand, a desperate tide of people would surge past the guards and rush onto the bloody floor. Their target was not the man's weapons or armor, but his lifeblood itself. They would crowd around the corpse, cups and bowls in hand, scrambling to catch the warm, flowing blood as it drained from his wounds, and then they would drink it. This was not an act of madness, but of medicine. The Romans believed that the blood of a strong, vital gladiator cut down in his prime contained a powerful life force that could be transferred to the sick. It was considered a potent, if gruesome, remedy for epilepsy, a condition the Romans called the falling sickness. They saw a brutal logic in this. A gladiator was the peak of human strength and vigor. His spirit, his anima, was at its most potent at the very moment of death. By consuming his blood, a person suffering from seizures was thought to be consuming that stolen vitality, replacing their own weak and faltering life force with a stronger one. This practice reveals a world where the line between science and superstition was dangerously thin. Roman physicians like Pliny the Elder wrote about this remedy as a genuine, if extreme, medical treatment. It showcases a culture that could build aqueducts and create complex laws, yet still clung to beliefs that seemed to us both primitive and horrifying. What does it say about a society that the same death it cheered for could, moments later, be seen as a source of healing? The arena was not just a place of death, but a twisted pharmacy where the ultimate price paid by one man was seen as the only cure for another. The thirst for gladiator blood reveals a society grappling with life and death, but the state itself wielded a punishment far more chilling than any physical death. It was called Damnatio Memoriae, the condemnation of memory, and it was an attempt to murder a soul retroactively. This was not an execution of the body, but an annihilation of the self from the fabric of history itself. When an emperor or a powerful senator was declared a public enemy posthumously, the Roman machine activated to scrub them from existence. Statues that once stood in forums across the empire were toppled, their marble faces smashed beyond recognition. Inscriptions on triumphal arches and public buildings were meticulously chiseled away, leaving only ghostly, empty patches in the stone where a name used to be. Official scrolls and histories were hunted down and burned, their accounts rewritten to omit the condemned entirely. Coins bearing their profile were melted down, removing their image from every purse and market. The goal was absolute, to make it as if the person had never lived, never ruled, and never achieved anything at all. For the Romans, this was a spiritual catastrophe. They believed that a person lived on only so long as they were remembered by the living, their spirit nourished by the prayers and honors of their descendants. To have your name erased and your likeness destroyed was to sever that connection to the world of the living, condemning your soul to wander in oblivion for all eternity. It was a fate considered far worse than a mere physical death. Imagine working your entire life to build a legacy of power and glory, only to have the state systematically dismantle every trace of your existence, ensuring that even your own great-grandchildren would never know your name. This practice reveals a terrifying aspect of Roman power, the understanding that controlling the past is the ultimate form of control. By erasing a disgraced emperor, the new regime could reshape reality, presenting a clean, uninterrupted narrative of their own legitimacy. The empty spaces on those monuments were not just absences, they were silent, screaming warnings to anyone who would challenge the system. What does it say about a civilization that its ultimate punishment was not to kill you, but to make you disappear from the story of the world? A city of wood and shadow, Rome was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. In the sweltering summer of 64 AD, that spark finally came. The flames began near the Circus Maximus, leaping from a shop selling flammable goods. Fanned by a strong wind, the fire became an unstoppable beast, raging for 6 days and 7 nights. It devoured entire districts, leaving 3 of Rome's 14 regions completely flattened and only 4 untouched. The heart of the empire was reduced to smoldering ash, and hundreds of thousands were left homeless, their lives erased by the inferno. In this chaos, the Emperor Nero's behavior was, at best, bizarre and at worst, monstrously suspicious. The famous legend says he fiddled while Rome burned, but the truth is more complex and far more sinister. He did not play a musical instrument, but ancient historians like Tacitus report that he ascended to a private stage and sang a poem about the fall of Troy, treating the real-time destruction of his own city as a dramatic backdrop for his artistic performance. To the traumatized citizens watching their world turn to cinder, this was not a sign of a concerned leader, it was the act of a madman. But was it madness or was it calculation? The most persistent dark secret is that Nero himself ordered the fire set. His motive was a dream project, a sprawling, decadent palace complex he called the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. This was not just a home, it was a fantasil, and intended to cover a significant portion of the city center with artificial lakes, sprawling vineyards, and colonnades stretching for miles. The land cleared by the fire was precisely where he wanted to build it. The timing was too perfect, the coincidence too great for a suspicious populace to ignore. Whispers spread like the fire itself that the emperor's own agents had been seen fueling the flames and preventing firefighters from containing the blaze, actively ensuring the destruction would be total. Facing a growing tide of public fury, Nero needed a scapegoat. He found one in a small, misunderstood, and already despised sect, the Christians. He accused them of starting the fire out of their hatred for humanity. What followed was a campaign of terror designed to divert attention and punish the innocent. Christians were rounded up in massive numbers. Their executions were not private affairs, they were public spectacles of unparalleled cruelty staged in his own gardens. Tacitus describes how they were covered in the skins of wild animals and torn apart by dogs. Others were crucified, still others were covered in pitch, impaled on stakes, and set ablaze to serve as human torches, illuminating Nero's evening parties. The emperor did not just punish them, he turned their agonizing deaths into evening entertainment. So who truly burned Rome? Was it a despotic emperor willing to destroy his own capital to satisfy his architectural vanity? Or was it simply a tragic accident, a common fire that grew out of control, which a paranoid and theatrical ruler used to unleash a pogrom against a vulnerable minority? The evidence is shrouded by 17 centuries of smoke and propaganda. The historians who recorded these events wrote under later emperors who had every reason to blacken Nero's name. The truth is one of history's most enduring and dark enigmas, a fire that consumed not just a city, but any remaining trust between the Roman people and the man who was supposed to be their protector. The blood used to illuminate Nero's gardens was a perversion of ritual, but some of Rome's oldest state ceremonies were brutal by design. One of the most bizarre was the sacrifice of the October horse. Each year, after the final harvest and before the new military campaigning season, the city held a grand chariot race on the Campus Martius. The entire event built toward a single, terrifying moment focused on the right-hand horse from the winning team. This animal, celebrated for its strength and speed just moments before, was suddenly surrounded. A priest stepped forward and drove a spear into its body, a ritual killing that was both an offering and a raw display of violence. The purpose of this sacrifice was deeply rooted in the two pillars of early Roman life, farming and fighting. The horse's blood was believed to hold a potent, primal energy from the fertile earth and the spirit of war, a power the Romans were desperate to capture. The ritual frenzy did not end with the animal's death. As the horse lay bleeding on the ground, attendants swiftly severed its tail. They then ran at full speed through the city, carrying the dripping appendage to the Regia, the ancient royal house in the Forum that served as the center of state religion. There they would smear the sacred hearth with the blood, a direct offering to the household gods of the Roman people, meant to ensure the fertility of the fields for the next planting season. Meanwhile, a separate and even stranger conflict erupted over the horse's severed head. The residents of two distinct neighborhoods, the Subura and the Via Sacra, engaged in a violent public brawl to claim the grisly trophy. This was not a random fight, it was a formal, ritualized struggle. The goal for the Subura residents was to nail the head to a prominent wall in their district, while the Via Sacra faction fought to attach it to the Regia. This violent tug of war over a dead horse's head symbolized a crucial balance of power, pitting the common, bustling Subura against the elite, sacred Via Sacra. The outcome was seen as an omen, forecasting either a plentiful harvest or a successful military campaign. The entire spectacle, from the racetrack to the brawling streets, reveals a Rome far removed from marble and philosophy, a society still clinging to primal magic where the spirit of a slain beast was believed to hold the future of the entire state in its blood. Yet even the most sacred rituals of the state could conceal a terrifying private execution. For the Vestal virgins, the women chosen to tend the eternal flame of Rome, a single misstep carried a punishment more horrifying than any gladiator's death. These 6 priestesses were selected as young girls from noble families, sworn to 30 years of absolute chastity. Their purity was not a personal virtue, it was the spiritual bedrock of the entire city. It was believed that if a Vestal broke her vow, the sacred flame would flicker and die, and Rome itself would lose the favor of the gods, inviting famine, plague, and military defeat. The consequences of such a failure were not just severe, they were ritualistically monstrous. If a Vestal was accused of breaking her vow of chastity, she faced a trial before the Pontifex Maximus, the chief high priest. A guilty verdict led to a punishment designed with chilling precision. Because a Vestal was consecrated to the goddess Vesta, it was a profound sacrilege to shed her blood or to execute her in a normal, public manner. Her death had to be a religious offering, an act of purification for the state. The condemned Vestal was therefore buried alive. She was dressed in funeral robes and placed on a litter, bound and gagged so she could not utter a curse against Rome with her final breath. She was then carried through a silent, horrified crowd, not to a public execution ground, but to a small, underground chamber near the Colline Gate that had been prepared in advance. This was not a grave dug into the earth, but a sealed tomb constructed within a subterranean room. A small lamp, a loaf of bread, and a vessel of water were placed inside, a cruel mockery of sustenance that extended her suffering for a few days at most. The priests would then seal the entrance with stone and earth, leaving her in absolute darkness to die of starvation, suffocation, or sheer terror. This was not a quick death. It was a slow, solitary extinguishing of a life, a human sacrifice meant to appease the gods the Vestal had supposedly offended. The few days of food were a critical part of the ritual, proving that the state was not actively killing her, but simply withdrawing its protection and returning her to the underworld powers. This practice reveals a world where religious law and ritual purity were valued so highly that they completely overrode human compassion. The life of one young woman was considered a small price to pay to ensure the continued survival of millions. Her terrifying end served as a brutal lesson to all, demonstrating that in the eyes of the Roman state, no individual was more important than the sacred order they were meant to uphold. The terror that began in the arena extended far beyond the city walls, becoming the official policy of the Roman war machine. While the legions were famous for their discipline and engineering, their true power lay in a calculated campaign of psychological warfare designed to paralyze enemies before a single sword was drawn. This was not just about winning battles, it was about exterminating the very will to fight. The most chilling example of this internal terror was a practice called decimation, a word we still use today that literally means to kill 1 in 10. When a legionary cohort was found guilty of cowardice or mutiny, the entire unit was forced to participate in a lottery of death. The soldiers would draw lots, and whichever 1 in 10 men drew the unlucky mark was immediately bludgeoned to death by his own comrades, often using clubs or stones. These were men who had trained together, fought together, and shared their lives. To be forced to murder your friend, or to be the one murdered by him, was a psychological trauma that seared absolute obedience into the survivors far more effectively than any external enemy could. This brutal internal logic ensured that the fear of their own commanders was greater than the fear of any barbarian horde. For those outside the empire, the message was even clearer and more horrifying. When a city dared to resist, its conquest was often followed by total erasure. Roman forces would systematically dismantle every building, salt the surrounding fields to prevent future crops, and either slaughter the entire population or sell every man, woman, and child into slavery. This was not random violence, it was a stark, premeditated lesson for the next city that considered rebellion. The roads leading into Roman territory were lined with crosses upon which rebels and escaped slaves were crucified, their slow, agonizing death serving as a gruesome public service announcement for miles. Travelers would pass by these rotting bodies for weeks, a silent, stinking warning of the price of defiance. This spectacle of suffering was Rome's most powerful weapon, a broadcast of absolute, merciless power that crushed the spirit of resistance before it could even form. The empire was not just built on the strength of its legions, but on the terrifying certainty it created in the minds of both its soldiers and its subjects, that resistance was not just futile but unimaginably costly. Beyond the sanctioned rituals of the state religion, a forbidden world of magic promised power over the very fabric of reality. Roman alchemists working in hidden workshops filled with strange glassware and smoldering furnaces pursued the ultimate secret, the transmutation of common lead into pure gold. This was not merely a quest for wealth, it was a spiritual endeavor to discover the Philosopher's Stone, a legendary substance believed to grant not only limitless riches but also immortality. Their experiments were a dangerous blend of early chemistry and profound mysticism, involving toxic mercury, volatile sulfur, and complex purification processes that could take a lifetime. A single misstep could result in a poisonous explosion or a slow death from fume inhalation, yet the allure of unlocking nature's greatest secret drove them on in their clandestine labs. But for those who sought answers rather than riches, an even darker path beckoned. Necromancy, the art of summoning and consulting the dead, was the most feared and illicit of all magical practices. A necromancer, or a desperate client seeking to know the future or curse an enemy, would venture to a graveyard in the dead of night. The ritual site was often a freshly dug grave or a crossroads known as a spiritual junction. There, within a protective circle scratched into the earth, they would begin the terrifying invocation. Ancient spellbooks describe how they would call upon the specific spirit by name, using chants and offerings to compel it to appear. The offerings themselves were grotesque, often involving the blood of a black dog or other creatures associated with the underworld, spilled upon the ground to feed and attract the wandering soul. The goal was to force the spirit to answer questions, reveal hidden truths, or even to attack a living enemy. The risks were immense. It was believed that the summoned spirit could lie, refuse to leave, or even possess the living practitioner, dragging a piece of the underworld back with it into the world of light. Why would anyone take such a terrifying chance? For some, it was the ultimate form of divination, a way to get answers that no living oracle could provide. For others, it was about power, the ultimate violation of the natural order to bend the will of the dead to their own. This shadowy underworld of alchemy and necromancy reveals a society deeply conflicted, one that publicly upheld tradition and reason, while in private, countless souls were desperately seeking answers and power from forces far beyond the official gods. Even the bustling taverns and trade shops of Rome concealed a deeper, more organized layer of society. Beneath the surface of daily commerce, a vast network of associations known as collegia connected people from all walks of life. On the face of it, these were simple guilds or social clubs, gathering bakers, sailors, or carpenters for mutual support. They collected monthly dues to provide a proper funeral for their members, ensuring no one would suffer the indignity of the puticuli. For the common Roman, a collegium offered a rare sense of community and dignity in a vast, impersonal city. But to the watchful eyes of the state, these very same clubs were potential nests of conspiracy. Any private gathering that could coordinate hundreds of men was a threat. Behind the closed doors of a baker's guild, plans for a grain price fix could be hatched, crippling the city's food supply. A club for dockworkers could easily transform into an organized crime ring, controlling the flow of goods through the port with intimidation and violence. Most dangerously of all, a collegium could become a front for a political faction or a banned religious cult, its members pledging allegiance not to the emperor but to a foreign god or a seditious senator. The authorities lived in constant fear that a collegium's treasury, meant for funeral expenses, could be diverted to buy weapons or bribe officials. The power of these groups was not lost on Rome's rulers. Julius Caesar, in his drive to consolidate control, enacted strict laws to dissolve all but the most ancient and trusted collegia. He understood that in a city fueled by rumor and ambition, a social club could become a revolutionary cell overnight. Later, Emperor Trajan continued this policy of suspicion, famously denying a request to form a fire brigade in a provincial town. His reason was chillingly pragmatic. He wrote that whatever name we give them, men who are gathered together for a common purpose will soon become a political association. He feared that a group organized to fight fires could just as easily coordinate a rebellion. This deep-seated paranoia reveals a fundamental truth about the Roman world. The state's immense power was perpetually fragile, threatened not only by foreign armies or mad emperors, but by the quiet conversations of ordinary citizens in a back room. The very human desire for community and belonging was, in the eyes of the empire, a dark secret waiting to be uncovered. A Roman banquet was a masterclass in public humiliation disguised as hospitality. The famed cena was not merely a meal, it was a brutal social battlefield where every delicacy carried a hidden barb. Guests were not seated together in a spirit of fellowship, they were strategically placed according to their social rank. The host and his most honored friends reclined on the best couches, enjoying the finest dishes and oldest wines, while less important visitors were positioned farther away, served inferior food and cheap, sour vinegar wine as a constant public reminder of their lower status. This calculated cruelty extended to the entertainment. Amidst the courses, a host might unleash a scathing verbal attack on a guest, dissecting their failures or mocking their family, all while the victim was forced to smile and endure it to maintain any shred of dignity. These dinners were crawling with professional flatterers known as parasites, men who would laugh at the host's weakest jokes and praise his most foolish opinions, all for a few scraps from the table. Their presence was a constant, degrading performance, highlighting the transactional nature of Roman friendship. And beneath the laughter and the lyre music, the most dangerous business was being conducted. Political alliances were forged over roasted peacock, and betrayals were whispered between sips of wine. A guest might spend the evening flattering his host, only to leave and immediately report every careless comment to the emperor's spies. This atmosphere of paranoia was perfectly captured by the poet Juvenal, who wrote of a patron fearing his guest as he carves the meat. And of course, there was the ever-present shadow of poison, a fear so pervasive that many wealthy Romans would only eat from dishes marked with a special anti-venom seal, a magical charm they believed could detect and neutralize toxins. The notorious vomitorium, however, is a historical myth. Romans did not have special rooms for vomiting so they could return to the feast. The word actually refers to the passageways in amphitheaters that disgorged crowds. The reality of their excess was less theatrical but equally disturbing. They would simply retire to a bowl or the street to relieve themselves, then come back to continue gorging. This cycle of consumption was not about enjoying food, but about demonstrating a grotesque level of wealth and a complete lack of self-control. A power play where the ability to waste was the ultimate sign of status. In the flickering lamplight of the triclinium, the Roman elite revealed their true nature, where friendship was a weapon, generosity was a trap, and every invitation to dinner was a potential invitation to your own downfall. That same paranoia that watched the collegia also watched its own legions, and sometimes an entire military unit could simply vanish. One of history's most enduring enigmas involves the complete disappearance of a Roman legion, the ninth, known as Legio Nona Hispana. This was not a new or inexperienced unit. It was a battle-hardened force of over 5,000 professional soldiers, a formidable machine that had fought for centuries under Julius Caesar and throughout the empire. Then, around the year 120 AD, it evaporated from all official records. One day it was a key part of the Roman military roster, stationed in the misty northern province of Britannia, and the next it was gone without a trace. The silence is deafening. How does an army of 5,000 men with its eagles, its standards, and its immense pride simply cease to exist? The most dramatic theory suggests a catastrophic defeat in the wilds of Britannia. The northern frontier was a land of constant, simmering conflict with fierce tribes like the Brigantes and the Caledonians. It is possible the Ninth was ordered deep into what is now Scotland on a campaign to subdue these tribes and was ambushed and annihilated in some remote, mist-shrouded glen. The entire legion, from its commander to its lowliest foot soldier, could have been wiped out in a single, brutal engagement, their bodies left to the elements and their story lost because no Roman survived to tell it. This theory is supported by the fact that soon after the legion's disappearance, the Emperor Hadrian ordered the construction of his famous wall, a massive defensive barrier that many believe was a direct response to a stunning military disaster that proved Rome could not conquer the far north. Another compelling possibility places the Ninth's doom not in the British fog, but in the blistering heat of the Judean desert. Around the same time, a massive Jewish revolt, the Bar Kokhba Rebellion, erupted against Roman rule. It was a desperate, bloody conflict that required the empire to pull legions from all over to crush it. Perhaps the Ninth Legion was transferred from Britannia to this new, brutal theater of war. There, in the chaotic guerrilla fighting, it could have been surrounded and destroyed by rebel forces, its destruction so total and so embarrassing to Roman prestige that it was deliberately scrubbed from the histories, another form of damnatio memoriae for a military unit. A third, more speculative theory suggests mass desertion. Could the men of the Ninth, weary of endless fighting in a cold, hostile land, have simply decided to lay down their arms? Did they break their sacred oath, melt away into the local population, or perhaps even turn against Rome to join the very tribes they were sent to fight? While desertion on such a colossal scale seems unlikely given the severe penalties and the unit's strong esprit de corps, the complete lack of any archaeological evidence for a battle adds a sliver of plausibility to the idea. The unsettling truth is that we may never know. The fate of the Ninth Legion remains one of the ancient world's greatest cold cases. Its disappearance is a haunting reminder that for all of Rome's power and meticulous record-keeping, the fog of history could still swallow an entire army, leaving behind only a ghost story written in silence. The final dark secret of Rome reveals a weapon sharper than any sword, the systematic destruction of a person's dignity. Beyond the battlefield and the Senate floor, the empire perfected the art of humiliation, a political tool designed to shatter an opponent's social standing so completely that recovery was impossible. This practice, a form of psychological warfare, ensured that a rival was not just defeated, but erased from the collective memory as a person of honor. The most spectacular display of this was the Roman triumph, a parade we often picture as a celebration of a general's victory. But for the captured enemy leaders forced to march in it, it was a prolonged and exquisite torture. Chained and dressed in the torn garments of their former office, these once proud kings were paraded through the screaming crowds, pelted with garbage and insults, a living trophy of their own subjugation. At the climax, as the triumphant general stood before the Temple of Jupiter, the prisoners were often taken to the nearby Mamertine prison and ritually strangled, their public degradation serving as the prelude to their execution. For Roman elites who fell from favor, the humiliation was more intimate but just as devastating. A political rival might find himself subjected to the plucking of his beard, hair by hair, a painfully slow and public act that symbolized the stripping of his masculinity and authority. The ultimate control, however, lay in the state's power to dictate how you died. Being ordered to commit suicide was a common fate, but the method was a final, cruel message. A nobleman might be sent a sword, granting him the honorable death of a soldier, but if he was given a length of rope or a sealed room with a charcoal brazier, the message was clear. His life was so worthless that only a shameful, silent, and painful end was suitable. This command extended to family members, forcing a son to oversee his father's suicide or a wife to carry the poison to her husband, twisting personal bonds into instruments of state terror. Why go to such lengths when a simple execution would suffice? Because Rome understood that a man stripped of his dignity was more thoroughly broken than a man merely deprived of his life. It sent a warning to everyone watching that resistance could cost you not just your future, but your entire past, every achievement and every shred of respect you had ever earned. In the end, the most terrifying power Rome wielded was not the power to kill you, but the power to make your entire life meaningless. From the calculated terror of the frumentarii to the silent, poisoned cup at a banquet, the world of ancient Rome was a tapestry woven with equal parts genius and brutality. We have walked through its reeking slums and descended into its sacred, subterranean tombs. We have witnessed how a civilization capable of breathtaking law and engineering could also practice infanticide as household economics and turn human suffering into public spectacle. This journey reveals a profound and unsettling truth that the gleaming marble monuments and triumphant arches were merely a facade. Behind them lay a society driven by deep-seated fear, potent superstition, and a ruthless ambition for power that corrupted everything from the imperial throne to the family home. Rome's grandeur was inextricably linked to its darkness, its order maintained by terror, and its luxuries built on a foundation of profound human suffering. Rome was not built in a day, but its darkest secrets were forged over centuries, and their echoes can still be heard today. Which of these 25 hidden realities shocked you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more journeys into the forgotten corners of our